Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. With less than 24 hours to go in the Trump administration, President-elect Joe Biden is looking to move quickly with his agenda for the country. Mr. Biden was sent off from his home state of Delaware earlier as he headed down to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration. Later, he and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris spoke at the Reflecting Pool on the National Mall to honor the 400,000 Americans who have lost their lives to COVID-19.
To heal, we must remember. It's hard sometimes to remember, but that's how we heal. It's important to do that as a nation. That's why we're here today. Between sundown and dusk, let us shine the lights in the darkness along the sacred pool of reflection. Remember all whom we lost.
The National Mall in front of the Capitol, where the inauguration will take place, has been decorated with nearly 200,000 flags. They represent the people who would have gathered to attend the ceremony. To expedite the process before inauguration, 5 of Mr. Biden's cabinet nominees began Senate confirmation hearings Tuesday. It comes as the chamber is set to swing into Democratic control. After she takes the oath of office, the new Vice President, Kamala Harris, will swear in 3 Democratic senators. They include Alex Padilla, who was appointed to fill her California Senate seat, plus Georgia's 2 new senators. That gives Democrats a 50-50 split in the chamber, making Ms. Harris the tie-breaking vote. New York Senator Chuck Schumer is set to become the Senate Majority Leader for the first time Wednesday. Democrats will now control the all-important Senate schedule for the start of the Biden administration, as well as the impeachment trial against President Trump. The House has charged him with inciting the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol earlier this month. Outgoing Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell gave his harshest criticism of the president to date, directly citing Mr. Trump's influence over those rioters.
The last time the Senate convened, we had just reclaimed the Capitol from violent criminals who tried to stop Congress from doing our duty. The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people. And they tried to use fear and violence to stop a specific proceeding of the first branch of the federal government, which they did not like. But we pressed on. We stood together and said an angry mob would not get veto power over the rule of law in our nation, not even for one night.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Nikole, Killion, and Jess Bidgood join me now. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. And Jess is a national political reporter for the Boston Globe. Welcome to you all. Caitlin, let's start with the Trump administration, with how the Trump administration is using its final hours in power. We're seeing a flurry of last-minute moves, formally accusing China of genocide as late as this afternoon. What does this mean for the incoming administration?
That's right. That was big news from the Secretary of State on this last final day of this administration. As our Margaret Brennan has reported, the U.S. now becomes the first country to acknowledge this as a genocide and had been reluctant to do so until now because of whether it might have done anything to upset the trade deals with China. But this does raise significant questions for the Biden administration and poses some challenges because it raises the question of what a Biden administration can and should do about it. Earlier today, Tony Blinken, who is Biden's nominee for Secretary of State, he had his confirmation hearing and he was asked about this, and he said that this is actually his assessment as well, his judgment as well. We also saw yesterday that the Trump administration moved to lift COVID restrictions on those coming in from Europe, from Brazil, from the UK. Those were set to go into effect on January 26th. The Biden administration says that that is not going to happen, that now is not the time to be lifting COVID restrictions.
Well, Nikole, when is the Senate going to pick up the Trump impeachment trial? And how does incoming Majority Leader Schumer plan to balance that with the Biden agenda?
Well, look, at this point, the ball is in Nancy Pelosi's court. Being House Speaker, it is up to her to hand over the article of impeachment to the Senate. And thus far, she has not given a clear indication of when that might happen, nor have her aides. And so until that happens, we kind of wait and watch. But no matter that, the Senate is certainly prepared to move on this, specifically incoming Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He said as much on the Senate floor earlier today, noting that, this is something that will happen, that there will be a trial and that there will be a vote, and that if the president is convicted, that he also intends to hold a vote on, him not being able to run for office again. So the Senate will take action when the time comes. And, the incoming Majority Leader also made clear that, he wants to put this chapter behind them. Obviously, by the time this trial comes to bear, President Trump will be out of office, and there have been some questions about the mechanics of that, if that's even doable, if that's even possible. But Schumer did make clear that it is important to hold the president accountable for what happened on January 6th. So that being said, there have been a number of proposals out there as far as whether or not the Senate, for instance, may hold an impeachment trial, but also still do the work of the president-elect as far as dealing with the confirmation hearings for his nominees and addressing his agenda, kind of splitting the day between those two things. There has also been a proposal out there by Jim Clyburn, the majority whip, who suggested maybe we just wait until after we get through the first 100 days of President-elect Biden's agenda. So, as far as the timetable, as I mentioned at the top, it is still unclear, but the Senate does intend to move forward with this trial.
All right. Well, Jess, I want to ask you about Gallup's final poll showing President Trump leaving office with 34% approval. Now, he governed with an average of 41% approval throughout his presidency. Both numbers are lower than any of his predecessor, dating back to Harry Truman when Gallup began this poll. Yet in his farewell speech, it was interesting. President Trump made clear that he sees his political influence continuing. Let's listen to some of that.
Our agenda was not about right or left. It wasn't about Republican or Democrat, but about the good of a nation, and that means the whole nation. Now, as I prepare to hand power over to a new administration at noon on Wednesday, I want you to know that the movement we started is only just beginning.
So, Jess, where does his movement head in the future?
That, I think, is a key question on the mind of many Republicans and Democrats in Washington, too. President Trump is, as you said, leaving office with the lowest approval rating of his tenure. He's leaving at a time when Republicans have lost the White House, his party has lost the Senate, and his party does not have control of the House. In many ways, he's leaving quite a bit of wreckage behind. But that said, the sort of fervent base that has been with him for the past 4 years still appears to be with him. And we are seeing evidence of that around the country, where you're seeing Republicans in some states like Arizona wanting to censure Republicans in state parties in some states, wanting to censure some Republicans who they feel haven't been sufficiently loyal to Trump. We're also seeing polling that says something like 7 out of 10 Republicans continue to believe that Trump should have won the election, that Biden did not win it fairly, which is, of course, false. But the sway that the conspiracy theories that the president has promoted and the personal loyalty he has engendered within his base of the party still seems to be very much there. That's something that worries some Republicans. You're seeing an effort now by some, like Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, to sort of lay the rights of the Capitol at the feet of Trump and say essentially that he inspired the mob with his words. Whether that turns into a bigger break between Republicans who are still supportive of Trump and Republicans who kind of want the party to move on beyond him remains to be seen. But I think despite the president's low approval rating, he still has serious support in his party, and he's going to be an important political factor going forward.
Right, because it's one thing, as we've been saying for weeks now, it's one thing for lawmakers in Washington to try to distance themselves. It's quite another for those folks out in the country who, as you point out, Jess, actually still have this very strong affinity, even in the face of what happened, the assault on the Capitol on January 6th. Caitlin, let's turn to the president-elect and dig into what exactly President-elect Biden plans once in office. What is it that we know so far about what's in store?
That's right. Well, the Biden team wants to hit the ground running and is going to introduce several executive orders on day one. That includes rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, that includes rejoining the World Health Organization, includes implementing a federal mask mandate where they can, so in federal buildings, for example. We are also going to see executive orders on immigration. Easing asylum restrictions is one example, and also extending protections for so-called dreamers. We're also expecting to have the president-elect, once he is president, introduce an immigration reform bill that will include an 8-year path to citizenship. That faces, of course, an uphill battle in Congress. Even though Democrats control all of Washington, their control of the Senate will be a very narrow majority. So we'll see kind of what kind of deals can be made on that front. We also know, of course, that fighting COVID-19 and addressing the economic fallout will be top priorities for this administration. Earlier, the president-elect introduced what he would like to see in a COVID relief bill. But rhetorically, the president-elect will also be drawing explicit contrasts with the outgoing administration and sees its mandate as really bringing the country together. While the country faces the pandemic and the economic crisis, it also is a deeply, deeply divided country, especially more so after this past election. So the Biden team has said that addressing this issue of unity and trying to speak to people who didn't necessarily vote for incoming President Biden, trying to bring the country together. So the Biden team really wanting to start with these priorities that they talked about throughout the campaign, addressing them through executive orders as much as they can, and also outlining parameters that it wants to see in terms of legislation.
Yeah, to follow up, Nikole, given the 50-50 split of Republicans and Democrats in the Senate after Wednesday, is the Biden team looking to Republicans to cross the aisle to support some of Joe Biden's agenda items?
Well, I think they realize that that's essential, and keep in mind over the last several weeks when we have heard the president-elect speak and, whether it's giving remarks or taking questions from reporters, he has made clear that he is in conversation with Republicans, whether that be Mitt Romney, Lindsey Graham, and others. And of course, given all the time that he spent in the Senate, he does know and realize that bipartisanship is essential in order to get elements of his agenda passed. Now, that being said, knowing that they do have or will soon have, 50 Democrats in the Senate, there are certainly some pieces of legislation where that may be sufficient. But ideally, they don't want to have to rely on that tiebreaker option with, of course, the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who would serve in that role. So, as far as the president-elect's nominees are concerned, concerned. We do know over the past several weeks that they have been making the rounds with lawmakers, that members of the president-elect's team and, folks on the Hill have been in constant communication on the timetable for this and to try to move these nominations through quickly, although realizing that it's possible and more than likely by tomorrow, of course, there will not necessarily be any of these nominees in place as confirmed secretaries. And so understanding that, certainly the transition is prepared for the possibility that they may have to have acting secretaries in the interim until some of these nominations can move towards confirmation. But for instance, with the defense nominee Lloyd Austin, there is a very strong push in the House to try to expedite a waiver for him since he does have past military experience, so that that can kind of clear the way, if you will, for his nomination process to move forward a little quicker. And two, as far as some of the other nominees are concerned, as far as today's hearings, we certainly heard some Republicans express support and indicate that they will in fact vote to support their nominations, namely Lindsey Graham with respect to Tony Blinken, who is the Secretary designate for Secretary of State. So again, the president-elect and his team realize cooperation is essential, and they're certainly hopeful that they can get it. But obviously, as we know here in Washington, that's easier said than done.
Absolutely. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Nikole Killion, and Jess Bidgood, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.